thanks for joining me in my studio today. Just kind of using a 8 circle croquet to pretty much figure out the proportions of my figure. These are often used for fashion drawing, and I'm using, the circle the size of the head that I want, and then I'm using this to determine where the neck and the waist and the wrists and knees and all of that is on the figure. And it's often done when you're using, basically creating an imaginary figure. You're not drawing from live. Um, and if you'd like to have the exact guide that I made for this figure, I'll post that on my blog and leave you a link below in the description of the video. But here I'm just kind of drawing everything out, and I find that I'm going to be using watercolors, so it's easier to erase something from pencil instead of trying to work it out once you've actually used the paint. Here I'm adding a larger circle for the hair, but the face is going to stay within the original circle, so that's what I'm using for my guide. And I'm also using a water-soluble pencil. And the reason why I'm doing that is, and it's a water-soluble graphite pencil. And I'm also using a Tombow eraser, which I find good when I'm working with such a small piece of artwork. But I'm using the graphite that's water-soluble because I am doing this with my non-dominant hand. As you can see, I've got a brace on my right hand, which is my dominant hand. And at the time of the filming, I did this while I was having a lot of difficulties with my right arm. So I was giving it a break, and found that, it's really hard to go without doing any kind of artwork. So I learned how to use my left arm for a good amount of my artwork. And I did this enough with my painting and my drawing and everything else that now I'm pretty ambidextrous with my artwork, which is a real plus. So everything has its silver lining, as they say. But here I'm just kind of drawing in the costume, and I'm giving her kind of a asymmetrical skirt, and I'm drawing in her lower legs. And this is a pretty simple pose. It's not a real dynamic pose, but it's real stable and more simple because it's face forward and she's not jumping or doing anything like that. That would be more difficult to do the sketch. And here I'm just using water to soften the graphite and to use it to shade a little bit. And it's kind of fun to do, and I'm just using a inexpensive paintbrush to do that. And I also kind of do that when I use Stabilo, but since I'm using watercolors here, I didn't really want to use Stabilo because sometimes that could really muddy up your watercolors. So I try to use the graphite with my watercolors as much as I can. And I'm starting out with a Prussian blue, and I'm using this a little bit for the shading. And as you noticed, I put it on a ceramic palette first. And you don't have to have a ceramic palette. You can use anything that, like you might want to recycle, like a plastic lid or whatever. But I really like the ceramic better. I just wouldn't use any kind of plate that you're actually going to use again in the kitchen. But you could use like a plate that no longer matches your kitchen dinnerware and just use that. A lot of times what I do is I like to collect antiques, so I have quite a collection of antique butter plates that I use for my watercolors as palettes, and I've picked them up very cheaply at different antique and kind of thrift shop type settings, and kind of have fun with it because they're pretty little plates to use. But here I'm just using a regular little watercolor ceramic palette. Now the second color that I put down was Rose Madder, and again I'm just starting out with the shading and using this to shade the features of the face, and I'm going in pretty loosely and I'm blending it right on the paper with the blue, and you know, I find that that gives more interest to the painting, and just like to do that, like to mix right on the paper instead of on the palette. And I think it gives you more intensity of the color when you're applying the actual color from you know, your palette directly to the paper instead of mixing it and blending it on the palette. Although, you know, some people do that, and it's a choice, and there's no one way to do anything. There's always a lot of different ways to do any project, but I'm just sharing the way that I've done it. Now here I wanted to have like a collar around her, so I'm kind of shading that and her blouse with the blue and her sleeve, and just kind of going in lightly, because when I use watercolors I'm always going in light first, and you can always add another layer. You can always add intensity to the color with the next layer, but you can't take it away. So I tend to be a little ginger in the beginning of any watercolor painting project that I'm doing, and just kind of go in with layers. So I'm continuing to use the blue, and just adding shadows where, you know, and shading wherever I think it should be on the figure. And here I'm just kind of bringing the watercolor down and up from it, and, you know, just to kind of smooth things out and blend them. And I'm using a very tiny brush. Typically I prefer natural bristles to synthetic, and I find that they tend to hold the paint better and the water. And I found a big difference in my painting with watercolors when I stopped using the cheaper synthetic brushes and I started using Kolinsky sable brushes. I really feel like it makes a major difference. But so if there's one splurge that you're going to make, I would make it on your brush, and you don't have to have every kind of brush there is. You know, the brushes that I have, I've purchased over time, one at a time, and, you know, if you treat them well, they will last a really long time. But and I try not to abuse them. I try to treat them very well, so they continue to serve well. And here I put, I used yellow paint and brilliant orange for the hair, and then I added some salt while it was still wet, and I off camera let it dry and remove the salt, because you don't want to be painting into the salt, especially if you're using a nice paintbrush. Um, but I find that it gives a lot of nice texture, and I tend to use salt a lot in my watercolor painting if I can. And here what you're watching is I'm just going in again with the rose madder and the blue and adding more shading and more detail, and just, you know, another layer of color onto the figure. And I'm just continuing to add, and here I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre, and the combination of a nice red, a nice blue, and a nice yellow, you can blend right on the paper to get a light skin tone. And I do that often. I prefer to blend on the paper instead of on my palette. Now, other people like to blend their colors first on their palette, and it is a preference and it's an artistic choice, and there's never one way to do anything. You always have options of whatever works best for you and whatever you feel most comfortable doing, but I'm just sharing what I'm doing. And here I wanted to add plaid to her costume, so I used my ruler to create that kind of like a checkerboard pattern on her dress. And I'm just adding more color to the palette and trying a little bit of different colors. And I would use, you know, whatever colors you like and are comfortable with. But again, I'm always, you know, this is the palette that I have. I do use a lot of Holbein and a lot of Daniel Smith watercolors, but you know, I wouldn't go out and buy a particular brand because it is an artist preference of what you like. You know, like you might like something different than I do, and that's okay. And so use what you have. But here I'm using a purple, and I'm also using an opera pink, and I love opera pink. It's just so bright and pretty, I guess, so I do use it quite often. Although and here I did use salt and let it dry off camera and took the salt off, but it doesn't have a wonderful light fastness, so if you're concerned about that, you might shy away from it, but I do use it and I do like it. Now here I have a little Payne's Gray, and I don't usually use black, especially when I'm painting something this small, so I do use Payne's Gray to darken a lot of things in a watercolor painting. And I might, in a larger one, use a little bit of black, but it's not very often. And then here I'm adding a little bit more blue and a little salt. And I'm kind of going through and painting the other side of her skirt with those colors and adding that checkerboard look, or plaid, however you want to say it. But I kind of wanted to do this as whimsical, and this is kind of my version of Alice in Wonderland. It can be used as just, you know, a fun kind of watercolor, or if you're into paper doll making, it could be kind of like a paper doll that you used, you know, for mixed media or whatever. But I kind of was just having fun with it and wanted to do something with a figure, because I tend to like to work with figurative art, and pretty much that's what I've been doing all along in different medium. And here I just added some purple to the blue and added a little bit of salt, and it does give it kind of a pretty texture, and I like the layering of it. You know, because you can paint on top of that down the road too, so I really like that. And I'm just continuing to add color to her costume and add salt.